Hi, my name is Danau Tanu, and I'm very honored to be part of the TCK Summit. And I'm grateful to Solonia and Grace from the Change School for inviting me and for also starting this conversation about the concept of global citizen, which is this month's theme. A little bit about me. I was born in Canada, but my father is Chinese-Indonesian and my mother is Japanese. And I grew up going mainly to international schools, but also spent some time at public schools in Indonesia, Japan, and Singapore. And even though my parents are what I would call serial migrants rather than people who moved due to their career, I very clearly identify as a third culture kid. But at the same time, I have a slight love and hate relationship with the term, which is probably why I ended up spending some 5 years of my life doing a Ph.D. as a social anthropologist on the topic of third culture kids and international schools. And my research focuses on the diversity of third culture kids as well as the Asian experience of the international school. And at the moment, I'm working on publishing a book based on my research, but you can also get snippets of the research in articles and chapters that I've already published. For example, I've got a chapter in this book called Writing Out of Limbo. It's a collection of memoirs and research by many, many different authors. And apart from that, I am also involved in the Third Culture Kid community as a co-host for the twice monthly Twitter event called #TCKChat, which was started by the founders of Bait Consulting, Amanda Bate, and Sea Change Mentoring, Ellen Mahoney. Now, Solonia and Grace asked me to speak on this month's topic, which is global citizens, because a lot of my research is about this notion of global citizenship or the related notion of being international. And today I'd like to talk about the diversity of ways in which we can be global citizens. But before I do that, I want to talk about the diversity of ways in which we can be a third culture kid to illustrate what I mean. As I said, I identify as a third culture kid, and I got to know the term through a friend as well as tckid.com, an online community started by Bryce Royer, as well as the TCK book that a lot of us know that was co-authored by David Pollock and Ruth Van Raken called Third Culture Kids. And so when I was reading a lot about third culture kids, I found that there was a lot of things that I could really relate to very strongly. But at the same time, I found that there was a lot about my experience as a third culture kid that was not included in what had already been said. And one example is the experience of being Asian at an international school, where, going to this westernized English-speaking school for me felt like I was being Western during the day, and then I'd come home and be Asian at home at night. And that was, a layer of the third culture kid experience that was different from, for example, the experience of my American TCK friends. Or the other one is about being half Indonesian while going to an international school in Indonesia, which made me not really an expat kid because dad was Indonesian. But at the same time, I wasn't really a local because my mom was Japanese, my nationality wasn't Indonesian, and I'm going to this English-speaking international school that local kids didn't really know what it was about. And so while growing up, moving around means that we share a lot of things. We have a lot of things in common with those who also grew up moving around. There's also a great, diversity of experiences among third culture kids. And I'll give you another example, not for myself, but somebody else. I was recently chatting with somebody I had met at an international school alumni gathering. And so this person I was talking to was born in Hawaii, and he had grown up moving from, living in different countries before graduating from high school. And his parents were also from two different countries. But the minute I told him about my research on third culture kids, he said, that's cool, but I don't really identify as a third culture kid. As far as I'm concerned, I'm Chinese. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's cool, no offense taken. But then a week later, when I met his friends, I looked around at his friends and I thought, oh my gosh, this guy totally fits the profile of a third culture kid, because half the people present had grown up in several different countries, and also, those who didn't grow up in several different countries. Among them was an Italian guy who had spent most of his adult life as an expat, a white American guy who spoke fluent Indonesian, a biracial woman, etc., etc. And so, but the thing is, this guy didn't identify as a third culture kid. And why is that? That's because people are different, and people with different backgrounds or different personalities experience the same things in different ways. The same situations they experience in different ways. And so there are many different ways of being a third culture kid, because at the end of the day, the term third culture kid really exists to help us understand our experiences, make sense of it, and understand what we have in common. But also there are significant differences among those who have internationally mobile childhoods. And in similar ways, I believe there are many different ways of being a global citizen. And I don't actually see the term third culture kid and global citizen as being synonymous. For me, third culture kid specifically refers specifically to people who grow up overseas or who grow up moving from country to country, whereas, and not everybody who is a third culture kid are global citizens, because for me, the term global citizen implies a sense of this, responsibility towards the earth and towards others who live on this earth. And likewise, not everyone who is a global citizen, whether they self-identify as one or not everyone who is a global citizen is a third culture kid. I'll give you an example. So recently, I spent 3 months with a bunch of students from a public high school in Indonesia, in Surabaya. And these students that I spent time with are part of the school's environmental club. And they are so committed to improving the environment in their school and their neighborhood that they spend a lot of time doing this, doing things like trying to reduce waste at their school, or going to the local wet markets, and which usually smell quite bad. They go there to pick up the leftover vegetables. Basically, they go there to pick up garbage, pack it up in bags, and bring bags and bags of them back to the school, where they've got a compost grinder, right, a grinding machine, and they've put all these wet, decaying vegetables into the grinding machine, and spend about 2-3 days doing this, and then a week later they have to do it again. They have to do it again with the already decaying, decomposting thing. And so I've been with them in this little compost room that they have in school, where you stand there, and while they're shoveling all of this, gaseous, stinking, wet, moist, green compost into the grinding machine, you can feel this rain of this thing falling on you. And it's not pleasant, and this is in the tropical heat, but they love doing this, and they're very committed to doing things like this. Why? Because they want to play their part in saving the environment. But have these kids, how much international experiences do these students have? Not much. They've never left their country because they can't really afford it, and maybe some have been on a plane, but I'm guessing most of them haven't. Most of them can't speak English. And for a lot of them, I was probably one of the first pseudo-foreigners that they've had any sort of significant interaction with. So they don't have these international experiences, but as far as I'm concerned, they're global citizens, because they feel responsible and actually act upon that sense of responsibility. They feel responsible towards issues that affect the globe and actually do something about it, right? And so they are global citizens, in my view, who operate in a very local capacity. But what they do has a cumulative global impact. And I realize one school's not going to make a difference, but at the same time, as these kids are doing this, there's an NGO in Surabaya called Tunas Hijau, which is trying to get all the schools involved with the support of the mayor. And so cumulatively, they will have an impact on things that go beyond their locality, right? And so, as far as I can see, they're global citizens. But often these aren't the students who get recognized as global citizens or get, fancy global citizenship awards. I think, often international school students have a, a better capacity of getting involved in the more international things and getting recognized as global citizens and things they do, even though often those who go to international schools are people who probably spend 10, 20, 100 times more energy per capita than the students that I met who I met in Surabaya. And so I'm sharing this story because I want to highlight the fact that, often there's a sense of contradiction in the way we understand or talk about the term global citizenship or global citizens, where the image of a global citizen is of people jet setting around the world and, growing up maybe in quote unquote exotic places or attending international school conferences or schools, while forgetting that, maybe these are the same people who probably have a bigger carbon footprint on the earth than others who don't. So I think it's important for adult third culture kids and cross-cultural kids to understand that our international experience does not automatically make us global citizens. There needs to be a sense of this taking responsibility for what happens around us and an awareness of our role in that. And I think it's important to understand that the global and global citizen does not actually exclude the local. In fact, the global is made up of the local. You can't have the global without the local, in the same way that you can't have international without the national. Right? But often our third culture kids who have gone through the international school systems, often for us, there's a sense that, we grew up in this uber international world where, our student body has 60 different nationalities represented in it. But without realizing that often, not always, but often, the international world that we live in is actually a bit of a bubble. It's an international bubble. It's a slightly socioeconomically privileged sort of international bubble, right? And by that I mean, we have sports competitions with the other international schools in the region where we have to take a plane to get there, or we attend Model United Nations to talk about climate change or etc. But then we take a plane to get there. And I understand that this is not always the case, but I have also heard of many stories where the main interaction for third culture kids going to international schools, the main interaction that they have with the local or host country nationals is either with the rich local kids, so quote unquote rich local kids in their international schools, or their maids, drivers, and gardeners who work for their parents, or maybe kids from the orphanages down the streets. And so there's a sense that we engage with the local, but I feel that the way we engage with the local is often very much on our terms. And I think these are the sorts of things that we need to sort of bring into the conversation about global citizens. And Solonia and Grace has asked, how do we cultivate a global citizen mindset? And I think I'll give just one example. It would be really nice, for example, to see international schools do more things like student exchange programs, maybe. Not to a school in another country, but with local schools in the area or maybe in the next city, where a bunch of international school students could perhaps spend a week at these local public schools and interact with locals who are the same age, who have the same level of education, although they might be slightly different in terms of socioeconomic background. I think more interactions like that, where the engagement with the local is slightly on a more equal sort of footing, I think could help us learn from a younger age on how to engage with the local, so that our understanding of global citizenship isn't just something that is, above the local, as though being a global citizen means you're above the local, but it could cultivate an understanding of global citizenship that actually engages with the local on an equal footing, and to cultivate an understanding that the global cannot actually exist without the local, right? And so the point I'd like to reiterate is that global citizens come in many different forms, and there are many different ways of practicing global citizenship, whether that difference is due to class, culture, or something else. So it would be great if we could, in talking about global citizens, to imagine many different ways of practicing global citizenship.